670 men rode into North Valley. By the next morning, 195 could still sit a horse. That gap was not caused by the enemy. It was caused by 4 lines of ink. And before you leave this valley, you will know exactly who wrote that order, what it actually said, and why not one man in the chain could stop it. Smell it first. Dry Crimean dust, horse sweat, gun oil warming in the October sun, 1,200 hooves waiting for a trumpet. Here is the question that should make you cold. If you were handed an order you knew was wrong, an order that would kill men beside you, would you obey it? These men did. Watch what obedience cost. End of narration. Silent aftermath. Visual echo of the cost. The order was written by Brigadier Richard Eyre on horseback on a scrap of paper. Lord Raglan dictated it. Read the words that killed them. Lord Raglan wishes the cavalry to advance rapidly to the front, follow the enemy, and try to prevent the enemy carrying away the guns. At the bottom, one word: immediate. Now find the poison. The guns. Which guns? Raglan sat on the Sapoon Heights, high above everything. He could see Russian crews hauling captured British cannon off the causeway redoubts. He meant those. But nobody down in the valley could see the causeway. 4 lines, no map, no landmark. Just the guns, scrawled fast and sent down a hill. How many disasters today begin with a message that made perfect sense to the person who sent it? Balaclava. The morning of 25 October 1854, in the Crimea, the mist was lifting off the ground slowly, the way it does before a cold day. The Russians had overrun a line of Turkish redoubts on the causeway heights and were dragging the captured British guns away. Raglan wanted them stopped. Look at the ground, because the ground is the whole tragedy. North Valley runs east to west. On the right rise the causeway heights, held by Russian infantry and artillery. On the left, the Fedukhin Heights, more Russian guns. And at the far end, straight ahead, a full battery of cannon and massed cavalry waiting. Anyone who charged down that valley charged into fire from 3 sides at once. Raglan could see all of it. The men below could see almost none of it. The order had to pass through 3 men. 3 men who did not trust one another. Lord Raglan commanded from the heights, 60 years old, one arm lost at Waterloo, seeing everything from above. Below him, Lord Lucoun led the cavalry division, and under Lucoun, his brother-in-law, Lord Cardigan, led the Light Brigade. Lucoun and Cardigan despised each other, family by marriage, enemies by temperament. They barely spoke. Orders between them moved stiffly, coldly, through gritted teeth. Now picture the physical distance, and Raglan on his ridge, a mile of open ground and hundreds of feet of height between him and Lucoun, who stood blind at the valley floor. A written order had to travel that gap, carried by a rider, into the hands of a man who could see none of what Raglan saw. The order went to Captain Louis Nolan, 15th Hussars, one of the finest horsemen in the army. And he knew it. Nolan held the cavalry in contempt that day because he believed they had already wasted 2 chances to strike. He watched the staff hesitate, and it disgusted him. So when Raglan chose him to carry the order down, Nolan spurred hard and took the steep slope at a reckless gallop, the fastest route down, dust exploding behind him, his horse lathered white by the bottom. Feel his mood. Impatient. Certain. Burning to see the cavalry finally used. Now hold that image. A furious man, convinced he already knows the answer, carrying an order that names no clear target, riding down to a commander who cannot see the field. What happens next was almost written already. Nolan reached Lucoun and handed over the paper. Lucoun read it and stopped. It made no sense. Advance where? Follow which enemy? Prevent them taking which guns? From the valley floor, he could see only one thing ahead. The Russian battery at the far end, 1.5 miles straight down that corridor of hills. He looked up and asked the only sane question. "Which guns?" Nolan, impatient, contemptuous, flung out his arm. "There, my lord, is your enemy. There are your guns." He swept his hand down the length of North Valley toward the battery at the far end, not up toward the causeway redoubts Raglan meant. One gesture. Wrong direction. Lukun saw the guns Nolan pointed at, believed them, and turned the whole brigade toward the mouth of the trap. Cardigan took his place at the head of the Light Brigade, straight-backed, silent. He believed the order was madness, and he obeyed it anyway. The trumpet sounded the advance. 670 horsemen moved as one. Hear it build. Creak of leather, the clink of scabbard against stirrup, bit chains ringing. Then the ground itself beginning to tremble as the walk became a trot. Not one man in those ranks knew they were pointed the wrong way. They knew only the thing they had been trained to know above all else: obey. A mile and a half ahead, the Russian battery watched them come, disbelieving, and quietly ranged their guns. A mile and a half ahead, the Russian battery watched them come, disbelieving, and quietly ranged their guns. Cardigan did not look back. He rode toward the wrong guns at a steady, deliberate pace, into a valley that had 3 edges of fire, into a valley that had 3 edges of fire. The first shells came in fast, and here is the cruelest turn of the whole day. Captain Nolan, the man whose arm had pointed wrong, was riding out ahead near the front. According to Mark Adkin, one of the first Russian shell fragments tore into his chest. He gave a single, terrible scream, unlike any battle cry, and his horse wheeled and carried his body back through the advancing ranks before he fell. Think about what died with him. He may have realized in Inez's last seconds that the brigade was going the wrong way. He may have been trying to turn them. We will never know. The only man who could have corrected the mistake was killed before anyone could ask him a second question. The truth was buried in the opening seconds of the charge. Now the valley closed its jaws. Guns on the causeway heights to their right. Guns on the Fedukin heights to their left. The battery dead ahead. And round shot plowed the ranks lengthwise, taking down men and horses in whole rows. Grape shot swept them like scythes, horses screaming, going down in tangles of legs, men falling silently, others still upright and riding, with wounds that should have stopped them. Smoke so thick the sun turned dirty brown, smell of burnt powder and blood and torn horse. And they did not stop. They did not turn. They closed ranks over the dead and spurred faster, driving straight into the mouths of the guns because faster meant fewer seconds under fire. This is the exact moment discipline stops being a virtue and becomes suicide. Picture it without flinching. And then the impossible happened. Part of the Light Brigade reached the battery. Through a mile and a half of crossfire, ragged survivors closed on the Russian guns and cut the crews down where they stood. Bloodied sabers, horses blown and heaving, Russian gunners falling back, white-faced, unable to believe that after all of it, cavalry had actually arrived. But there were too few of them, and they were far too spent to hold what they had reached. There was no infantry behind them, no support coming, no second wave. Then the Russian cavalry counterattacked from beyond the guns, and the survivors spaced a single arithmetic. Turn around, ride back through the very corridor of fire they had just crossed. They had won a patch of ground they could not keep for even a minute. The way back was worse than the way in. The same 3 batteries, now firing on men who had nothing left. Broken horses, riders on foot because their mounts were dead, wounded men clinging to the manes of blown animals, letting the horse choose the path home. Watch one of them, a trooper on foot, sword gone, dragging one leg, stepping between the bodies of men he had trotted beside an hour before. The guns quieting only because there were fewer targets left to hit. And then the strange, ringing silence after the last shot. Thick, with the smell of the dead. He had never once known the name of the man who fell beside him in the line. Do you know the name of the person who lives next door to you? Next morning, they called the roll. Of the 670 who had ridden in, roughly 195 could still answer and sit a horse. Around 110 dead, about 160 wounded, some 375 horses gone. French General Pierre Bosquet watched the charge from a hilltop and spoke the line that outlived every man in it. C'est magnifique, mais ce n'est pas la guerre. It is magnificent, but it is not war. And, less often quoted, he added, it is madness. Sit in the silence over that number. Each empty saddle at roll call was one more man who had received an order he could not question from a chain of men too proud and too blind to fix it in time. 6 weeks later, a poem rewrote what had happened. Alfred Lord Tennyson read the report in the Times and wrote The Charge of the Light Brigade in a matter of minutes. It appeared in the Examiner on 9 December 1854. He did not hide the error. Someone had blundered, the poem admits, plainly, but then it turns away from that blunder and toward the men. Fears not to reason why, theirs but to do and die, and a nation chose which half to remember, not the 4 careless lines of ink, not the 3 commanders who despised each other. The courage, only the courage. It is easier to honor obedience than to ask who deserved to be court-martialed for it. That is a choice a country makes on purpose, and Britain made it. Blame began at once, and it never ended. Raglan, in his official dispatch, laid the fault on Lucan. Lucan, furious, demanded a court-martial so he could defend himself publicly. He was never granted one. Instead, he was recalled from the Crimea in 1855. His career finished, his name attached to a disaster he insisted was not his fault. And Cardigan, who had led the charge and survived, sailed home to England and was received as a hero, cheered in the streets. And Nolan, the man whose arm had pointed the wrong way, was dead. He could not testify, he could not explain. So the dead man became the convenient one to blame. Notice the pattern. The higher you sat, the safer you were. Raglan saw everything and answered for nothing. Record keeps this. 25 October 1854, North Valley, Balaclava. The record keeps this. 670 rode in, roughly 195 answered the next roll call. The record keeps this. 4 written lines and 1 word, immediate. The record keeps this. On 2 August 216 BC, near the river Orpheadas in Apulia, another army obeyed its way into annihilation at Cannæ. The record does not keep this. Which trooper first understood, mid-gallop, that the guns ahead were the wrong guns? Record does not keep this. What Nolan screamed in his final second, or whether he was trying to turn them all back. The record does not keep the name each dying man called out to the stranger beside him. Numbers survive. Orders survive. The men who obeyed them become a total in a column. So come back to the mouth of that valley, to the moment before the trumpet. 670 men, and not one of them refused. They rode into fire from 3 sides, because a chain of proud men could not admit a mistake, and because obedience had been trained into them deeper than fear. That gap between 670 and 195 was written in ink before a single shell fell. Now, the question that opened this turned on you. You are in that line. You have read the same order. You can see the guns are wrong. Do you break ranks, refuse, and live as the coward who disobeyed? Or do you ride and die correct? Tell me honestly which one you would choose, and if your own family carries a war order that was never questioned, tell that story too. Closing, emotional beat after the narration ends.